The first one is from Brian Cullen. Comes from us from Nagoya. His presentation will be about metaprograms and for use in the language classroom. So everybody, round of applause for Brian Cullen.
Thank you very much, Rob. Good morning, folks. Good morning. Everybody made it to Kobe, and we've got a nice small group today. That means we can really get into this in detail. I'd like to thank everybody for coming along, and I'd like to start with a quick story. It's an old story.
I'll do this.
There were two businessmen who were having a quarrel, and they couldn't resolve their quarrel, and it was getting very serious. So they went to a judge, and the judge was a famous, very wise judge. And the judge said, "Okay, I'd like to hear both of your sides." And the first businessman came and he explained his case, and he explained it really eloquently, and it was beautifully done. And at the end, the judge said, "That's right." And then the other businessman came up and he told his story. And he told it equally eloquently, even more so. He came up and it was beautifully presented. And the judge said, "That's right." And the court clerk looked at the judge and he said, "Well, they can't both be right. And can they?" Because you may have noticed in your life that not everybody thinks the same way as you. Have you ever noticed that?
Are you still in the middle? You're in the middle. You're in the middle of the story?
Oh, yes, I might come back to the story.
Yeah, because what was that?
Yes.
All right. Well,
I think we will get back to the
not the
story.
same as one thinking about supply.
Oh,
I won't preempt.
we are in the middle of a story. And we'll get to the end of the story, I promise. And if we don't, remind me. And it's good to wonder about that, because when we're thinking, of course there are many different ways to think. People think in different ways. And it's also interesting that some people think differently in the same way. If you know what I mean. I mean, you are able to say, well, this person's thinking is a little bit similar to this person's thinking. And so people have tried to categorize or type people's thinking in many ways. For example, Carl Jung, he's a classic example. He talked about different psychological types. Now, Carl Jung was interested in it because, he was very involved with Freud, and, he liked Adler, and he wanted to bring them together because the two of them were fighting all the time. And they were both very, very smart people, but they were smart in different ways. Now, Jung came up with this idea that Freud's theory is based all about being an extrovert. And he had this idea that Adler's theory was all about being an introvert. And his idea was that the two of them have two very different ways of looking at the world. And he came up with this idea of psychological types to try and bring them together and show them that they don't really have a problem with each other. It's simply that they're looking at the world in different ways. Now, if we take Jung came up with 3 or 4 later basic psychological types. So the classic one was extrovert, introvert. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions. Now, usually I do this standing up, and I have people walk to one side of the room or the other. I'm not quite sure that's going to work in this room. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to ask you a question. And what we'll do is we'll raise our right hand. No, to make it more obvious, we'll either point to one side or we'll point to the other. Okay. So let's see. If I ask you a question like, when it's time to recharge your batteries, you want to recharge your batteries. Do you like to be with other people? or do you like to be alone? Okay, so I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, without looking at other people. If you like to be with other people, point to this side. If you like to be alone, point to this side. Now, I know you might wonder and find it difficult to make a choice. Make a choice, just for the purpose of this exercise, okay? So, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you can see, let's see, how many people we have, probably about half the people over here, maybe a little more, maybe 60% here, about 40% here. So the extrovert-introvert distinction is a very classic one. So let's try another one. Supposing you're going to learn a new project. Would you like to get the big picture first? Would you like to get the relationships between all the different things? Or would you be more interested in like getting right down to it? Getting down to the details and really working on a particular issue right away? So, again, those people who like to go for the big picture, who like to get the big relationships when you're learning or starting a new project, you can point to this side. If you like to really get down to the details immediately, point to this side. 1, 2, 3. Ah! Okay, so we have, oh, we're changing, yeah. So probably we have more big picture people. Now this is another of the classical distinctions. It's the intuitor or the sensor distinction. Let's go to a third one. If you're making a decision, you tend to make your decision based on logic, you really think about the issues, or do you tend to make it based on feelings, your emotions about the situation? Let's see, thinking, logical people. 1, 2, all you happy feeling people. Case by case, yes, I'm glad, because we're going to come back to that. Okay, I'll give you one more. This is the perceiver-judger distinction. So, if you're, you know, if you and I were going to do a project together, and would you like to, you know, plan out each step carefully? Would you really like to have a good, clear plan? Or would you just like to let it emerge, you know, let it flow? Let's see, who would like to plan out each step? Yeah? Who would like to let it flow, let it emerge? Okay? Now, so it is clear, for the 4 questions, if I force you to make a choice, and I agree with Elaine, it can be difficult to make a choice. If I force you to make a choice, people do tend to fall into particular thinking styles. Now, the 4 questions that I gave you, they form the basis of the Myers-Briggs personality test. So, in the first question, if you're, it was, how do you recharge your batteries? Are you an extrovert or an introvert? So you're E or I. The second question, are you an intuitor or a sensor? The intuitor is the big picture. The letter for that is N. Have a look at your handout, actually, on page 2. So we have those 4 first questions. Oh yeah, 2 handouts. There we go. Better handout?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, that's it, yep.
One more?
Oh, yeah.
No, here you go.
Oh, okay, we have one more.
One more?
You guys sure squeezed a lot of people into this tiny room. So, we had the first 4 questions. These, if you were doing the full Myers-Briggs personality test to determine how you think and how you behave, you would answer lots and lots of questions. What these questions here, for example, number 1, when it's time to recharge your batteries, do you prefer to be alone or with people? This is a shorthand version. It's a quick way of doing it. There's about 70% correlation with the full test. So it's convenient. It won't give you as accurate a result as the whole Myers-Briggs, but it's a very good shorthand way. And it's also easy to do in your classes. Now, we have the first 4. So, let's see, how many people label themselves as an introvert? Yeah? Yeah? How many people extrovert? No, that's I or E. Next one, you have the sensor or intuitor. So how many people were interested in the details, the sensor? How many people wanted the big picture? Teachers tend to want the big picture. That's the internal state, you're a thinker or feeler when you're making decisions. Who's a thinker? Who's a feeler? Yeah. Okay. Your adaptive response, judger or perceiver. So if you like to really plan things carefully, you're a judger. If you like to let things emerge, you're a perceiver. Who's a judger? Okay. So let's have a volunteer. Elaine. Oh, we have a volunteer. Peter. Okay. A real volunteer.
I'm the kind of person who always volunteers for these things. There's always one in every crowd. I know I'm going to be embarrassed, but it's okay.
So what was your 4-letter combination?
Actually, the first one I didn't choose.
Well, today I'm going to force you to choose.
Okay, since I just said I'd come up here, I have to say extrovert, right?
Okay.
Okay.
So you're E.
E.
And then, do you like the big picture or do you like all the details?
So, intuitive.
Okay, so we call that N for intuitor. So EN.
And F, feeling.
So you're ENF.
And P.
P.
Yeah,
P.
perceive.
Okay, so an ENFP, I printed these out from a site called, I think it's personalitytype.com. If you just put in your 4-letter code into Google, you'll find this page. That's all you need. So, and students love this. They love anything to do with personality. So you are ENFP.
ENFP.
ENFP is the inspirer. Enthusiastic, idealistic, and creative. Able to do almost anything that interests you. Peter's going redder and redder. Capture that in the camera. Great people skills. You need to live life in accordance with your inner values. You're excited by new ideas, but you're bored with details. Yeah? You're open-minded and flexible, with a broad range of interests and abilities. Okay. Yeah? So is it true? Maybe. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. Round of applause. Elaine raised a very good point. It's hard to choose. And the important point, from the point of view of critical thinking, is not that we choose. We don't want to put people into little boxes. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to help people to figure out how other people are thinking differently. And other people do think differently. So we have these 4 axes, and we can say, oh yes, in this realm of life I'm here, but in this realm of life I'm over here. And that person is another way. Now when we start to take this into account in our communication, in our teaching, and when we start to recognize it in other people, that's when we can adjust our communication. That's when we can adjust our teaching to reach that other person. We don't want to stereotype people, but the fact is people do fall into categories. I have a paper that I published a couple of years ago comparing the average Myers-Briggs of the United States and of Japan. They're very different. Very interesting. If anybody's interested, let me know. I'll send you the paper. So, Jung put forward these 4 initial ones. Lots of other people have developed them. In the field of NLP, in the lab profile, in a lot of business profiling tools, people have expanded the number. So, let's see, how are we in time?
And you are at 8 minutes.
8 minutes. We've only spoken for 8 minutes.
No, you have 8 minutes left.
That's what I thought. Just trying my luck. We have 4 more here on your handout. Now, we have the direction filter. Do you move towards what you want, or do you move away from what you don't want? Here we have a picture. Are you running away from a tiger? Or are you running after a butterfly? Some people will say, I don't want to be poor. The tiger is chasing you. Some people would say, I want to be really well off, I want to have a great life. They're running after the butterfly. These are very, very different ways of looking at the world. If you're working with students, and the student is an away person, if you say to that student, you're going to fail, it'll be very effective. If you say to that student, think of all the good things you can get, that away student probably won't care. Of course, we want people to be able to do both. What we want is for people to become skilled enough to use all of these thinking sets, to use them in an appropriate way, and to recognize them in other people. We have the other one, number 6, frame of reference, external or internal. How do you know when you've done a good job? Do you know inside? Do you have a certain feeling in your own body? Or do you know because somebody tells you or you see something? So let's see, how many people just know that they've done a good job inside? Yeah? How many people need some kind of external validation? Yeah? Yeah, both are good, definitely. Both are good, and that's what I would like to emphasize. These are not boxes, they're skills. We should be trying to develop these skills within ourselves and in our students. So for a student to be able to recognize internally as well as externally. Number 7, with the matcher-mismatcher. Matchers tend to agree with everything. Mismatchers tend to disagree with everything. What? Have a handout. Thank you. Mismatchers come later. You know, if you're saying to somebody, do this, do this, do this, and they're always doing the opposite thing, sometimes, well, they're obviously a mismatcher. Then maybe it's good to tell them what you don't want them to do. Because then maybe they'll mismatch you again, and they'll do what you want them to do. Don't do your homework. They say, I will do my homework. And again, as you start using these, you'll notice people have very different ones. And number 8 is our convincer strategy. This is very commonly used in sales. Some people get convinced by seeing, some people get convinced by hearing. Some people need to do something. Some people need to do it a certain number of times. For example, if somebody understands English once, some people will say, wow, I understand English. Yeah, I can do this. Some people, they'll need to listen many, many times. They'll need to understand 100 times, and then they'll say, oh yes, I understand English. 5 minutes? Great. Okay, for all of these, they're skills. Now, you can just use these questions as they are in class. That's how I have used them many times. I give the questions to the students, I have them in pairs, they ask each other, they have a lot of fun. They learn lots of vocabulary. I give them out these summaries for the first 4. They can say, oh yes, that's me. That's really my personality. They learn lots of vocabulary. That's very useful. That's at basic level. But really what we want to do is to develop those skills, to be able to recognize the thinking patterns of other people. So on page 4 in your handout, I have a sample reading-writing activity. Now this is an activity that I did with a pretty high-level business communication class. Now these were good students. Now I crafted a letter. I wrote this letter, and it's very deliberately targeting one combination of those 8 metaprograms. So, for example, I'm writing today to tell you about a great training opportunity that could change your whole business. Not just a few little things, but the way that you look at everything. Is that an intuitor or a sensor? That's an intuitor. That's aimed at a big picture person. I don't have time to go through this now, but I do recommend later, when you have time, have a look through it. For your own students, you may need to simplify it. In my class, how I've done it is, I had students go through this, they analyze it, they identify the targeted metaprograms, and then for their homework, I have them write a letter or write a presentation, and they have to decide their own target. So they have to figure out, well, they have to decide arbitrarily one target. So, for example, an ENTJ, and then somebody who moves towards, an external person, a mismatcher, with a convincer strategy of X. They make their presentation or their letter. The following class, if it's a writing class, I'll have them change their letters around. The other people have to then analyze it. So they have to say, who is this target? If it's a presentation class, same thing. They'll listen and they'll analyze it. By the end of an activity like this, you'll find that your students have a much better ability to recognize different thinking styles and to start using different thinking styles themselves, to start stepping out of their own box and to move into a space where they can really become more flexible in their communication to match the person that they are talking to. Now you can use this in reading. You can have them compare 2 reading pieces. Have them analyze it. What kind of thinker is this person? There was a story, wasn't there? Do you remember the story? Where was I in the story?
The clerk said, how can they both be right?
That's right, how can they
And the
both be
judge
right?
said, you say it.
Ah, yeah, how can they both be right? Because just for the benefit of people who came in late, well, there was the quarrel. And one person, well, they come to the judge, and there's 2 people, and they're disputing. And the judge listens to the first man. And the first man is so eloquent and describes his case perfectly. And then the second person also describes her case perfectly, eloquently. And in the first case, the judge says, that's right. And in the second case, the judge says, that's right. And the clerk says, well, they can't both be right, can they? And of course, the judge says, that's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Brian, to Brian, excuse me. Great presentation. We'll take the floor for questions. Anyone's got any comments?
Do you mention negative characteristics
Negative character, for example.
when you were analysing or giving the characteristics?
Oh, do I specify which is good and which is bad?
Well, it's all
Yeah.
complementary stuff.
Right.
And do you ever go into sort of less complementary comments? Probably not.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question actually.
Well, I mean, if you, for example, if you talk about star signs or something,
Right,
you'll
right.
say, you have these positive characteristics,
Oh, right.
these negative characteristics.
Yeah.
So,
The way I frame it is, initially I do it as a personality exercise. And no, I wouldn't say that this is good or this is bad. Because really I think any of these skills are useful in certain circumstances. There are times when it's good to be focused on the details. There are times when it's good to be focused on the big picture. And what I would like is for students, for people in general, to be more skilled in using both sides. Did that answer your question?
Not quite. What,
Yeah.
for example, if you say, you know, you're hardworking, right? Would you ever say maybe you're a bit lazy? You know, that kind of thing. I mean,
I think I would try that.
I think you
it's a
said
very
that
good
to me,
idea.
right? You said, for example, to me, I don't like dealing with the details, right?
Ah.
So that's a little bit negative, right?
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of true.
But would you use like the actual vocabulary, like lazy or arrogant, or you are bullyish, stuff like that?
I would,
Selfish.
Yeah, I would use it if I thought it was appropriate. In general, I try to keep it as positive skills, but of course there are situations where it is
You
appropriate.
really like yourself.
Have fun with it, yeah. Yes.
Just kind of following up on the question, what I kind of understood it as, do you ever point out that, okay, being an extrovert has its problems? Or being someone who, being an introvert has its problems, it's more difficult for you to network, and therefore it's going to be more difficult for you to make connections. This is the challenge before you. Or you're more of a detail-oriented person, the challenge before you is, you may get caught up in the details and miss what's going on around you. I mean,
Definitely.
whereas the description you gave was more like, hey, everything you do comes up roses.
You see, I don't consider it all to be equally useful in any situation. If you're looking for a job where you have to work independently, and you're always waiting for external validation, that's not a very useful way of thinking. So definitely in any particular situation, yes, there are negatives. In general, as skills, I don't think so. I think there can be a situation where any of them can be useful. What I think is that people should learn both, as much as possible, be as flexible as possible so that you can adjust.
We take one quick question.
Right, that was really interesting. I was coming here today, I was wondering, how's Brian going to pull this off, connecting these personality types and critical thinking types? And I think halfway through, I think I got it. We're all walking around in our heads with our own assumptions of the way we communicate, and if we assume that other people all communicate the same way, we may make some errors in communication. Are there any particular rhetorical styles that apply to this kind of person or that kind of person that we can recognize in writing? Such as in argument, conclusion first as opposed to conclusion last, or those sorts of things.
That's a very good question, and it's something I'd love to talk about. But there's not really time here. What I would like is if anybody uses this activity, or if you develop your own, I'd love to see it. I'd love to hear about it, because I've had a lot of fun. I've seen a lot of development in students using this. So if anybody is interested, please do try it out. Just get in touch.
In the development of their critical thinking skills?
That too. Or using it with students.
But you use these orally?
Oh, use them orally in presentations. Yeah.
Go finish that one.
Yes. So I have them actually ask the questions orally, and then I'll have them read out the summary
Do you do
orally.
any like the NLP, like the sensory
This is going to be very quick.
training to hear people's programs?
It helps.
I've done it in my class sometimes if they found
We're-
very interesting.
Yeah.
We have to leave that there.
Thanks for
So everyone can
Thank you
round
very
of applause
much.
for Brian Cullen.